All right, welcome back. I have a new box of cards to open here. I bought 2 boxes of 2022 Historic Autographs, the Washington Chronicles. I got a pretty good deal, I think. These are kind of interesting. The base cards are, I'm going to see what they're like. They have some rare inserts, which I'm not terribly likely to get. That could be really interesting. So let's see what we've got here. All right, let's see what we've got. Okay, on top we have something here. We have a booklet of some kind. Okay, it's a book about the cards, what the base cards are. And it looks like it really is centered all around Washington and people he interacted with. So Thomas Jefferson, Benedict Arnold, Washington's capture, Washington's estate, Martha Custis Washington, etc. Okay, and then we have a poster of some kind. Oh, George Washington family tree. I will go ahead and unfurl this here. I guess they look card shaped, so I guess you could make your own little family tree from the cards. That's kind of cool. So let's get into the cards, see what we've got here. This says bonus pack. Are they all? They're all labeled bonus packs, not intended for individual sale. Okay, we've got, oh, they're a little bit shiny. That's interesting. So Pope's Creek Plantation. I'm going to learn some history here. In fact, let's see what that says. Was where George Washington was born. George Washington's father, Augustine, built the plantation house in the 1720s. The plantation was 1,300 acres with 20 to 25 slaves. The Washingtons lived there until George was 3. Then they moved to Little Hunting Creek for 3 years, and then to Ferry Farm. Okay, so that's where he was born. Then we've got William Bradford here. I know the name, but I don't know exactly what he did. Oh, yes, I was reading about him, actually. So I've been reading about the Founding Fathers, but I don't have them all memorized. He was the second United States Attorney General. He died in office the following year. He died at 39. Trained as a lawyer, Bradford rose through the military ranks during the Revolution until illness forced him to retire in 1779. He went on to argue the first case ever before the Supreme Court and substantially reduced the use of the death penalty in Pennsylvania. Very cool. So I don't know if you can tell the shiny. Hopefully you can see it. So the picture of him is shiny and the background is matte. Glossy versus matte. The Fairfax Resolves. George Washington presided over the ratification of the Fairfax Resolves in Virginia on July 18, 1774. This set of resolutions rejected the British Parliament's claim of authority over the American colonies. Although other counties created similar resolutions, the Fairfax Resolves were strident in their objection to becoming the slaves of the British Empire. Obviously, the use of the word slaves is ironic, right? Because they were still keeping slaves. The Battle of Brandywine. September 11, 1777. British generals Howe and Cornwallis launched an offensive against Washington and the Patriot outpost at Brandywine Creek near Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania. The British split their 18,000 troops in an attempt to surround the smaller Continental Army of 11,000 soldiers. Due to the dense fog, Washington was caught off guard and ordered his men to retreat. Defeated, the Continental Army marched north, and the British began their occupation of Pennsylvania. Wow. So that was a loss and a hasty retreat. The Battle of Quinton's Bridge. I'm not going to be able to read all these because my voice is a little rough, but I will read some of them. On March 17, 1778, colonial militia formed a line of defense on the south bank of Alloway's Creek. The British, having occupied Salem, attacked the next day and by a ruse drew the colonials across the creek into an ambush. 7 colonials died in the retreat, but the creek line held. Okay, so I'm not going to read the back of that. Oh, the inauguration. Wow. April 30th, 1789. All right, Vermont. Oh, are we going to have some dedicated to each state? Or each state in the original 13? Vermont became a state on March 4th, 1791. On January 15th, 1777, representatives of the New Hampshire Grants, a territory also claimed by New York, declared the independence of Vermont. For the first 6 months of its existence, it was called the Republic of New Connecticut. Later that year, delegates renamed the territory the Vermont Republic. Ethan Allen, leader of the famed Green Mountain Boys, was a large landowner in Vermont, and the state draws its nickname from the Green Mountains, which lie within its boundaries. It was the 14th state admitted to the Union. Okay. So, it was not part of the original 13. It was divided up from other states. The Alien and Sedition Acts. Okay, this is a long one, so I'm not going to read it. That was 1798, signed by President John Adams. Myth that he wore a white wig. George Washington did not wear a wig, as was common among elite men of his day. Washington preferred his own hair, which he powdered to look white. White hair was considered a sign of wealth and intelligence. Very cool. Jean-Antoine Houdon, I'm guessing is how you say that. 1741 to 1828, French artist known for his portraits and sculptures of famous figures. Very cool. Okay, Washington's religion. George Washington was baptized into the Anglican Church, the Church of England. In 1765, Washington swore an oath to conform to the doctrine of the Church of England as required by the House of Burgesses. Washington rarely discussed his religious beliefs and attended the services of multiple Christian denominations. In later life, Washington did not take communion because of his role in the Revolutionary War. He did not feel that his heart and mind were in a proper condition to receive the sacrament. Washington was a deist. He believed in human reason as a reliable means of solving social and political problems. Washington supported religious freedom for others, not just toleration, and the complete separation of church and state. In his writings, he referred to the blessing and protection of heaven. Nice. James Craik. I actually don't know that name. The Physician General of the United States Army. General George Washington's close friend and personal physician. One of the 3 physicians at Washington's deathbed. And tried to save him with bloodletting. I mean, I don't remember what he was dying from, or if they even knew. But yes, bloodletting could have certainly hastened his death, if not caused it. The Continental Congress, very cool. That's what I've been reading about, is how they were making some very delicate decisions. Yeah, looking back upon our founding fathers with 21st century's eyes, their flaws are apparent, as many of these men owned slaves. But the men of the First and Second Continental Congresses created a country with true democratic ideals. It may have taken nearly 250 years, but the words of Jefferson now ring true. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. The Battle of Princeton, 1777. Lila, British General William Howe's dog. Don't know how that... Oh, she followed George Washington around. Oh, the dog belonged to a British general, but somehow found George Washington and followed him around. That's pretty funny. Christopher Shields, somebody who was at Washington's deathbed, it seems, was a slave in George Washington's household. He served as Washington's body servant while he was president. He attempted to escape in 1799, but was unsuccessful. He was president at George Washington's deathbed a few months later. Since Shields was a dowered slave, he was not among the 123 slaves intended to be freed upon Washington's death. I have to look up what dowered means. I know what a dowry means. Yeah, does that mean... I don't know. I'm going to have to look it up. The first Bank of the United States, signed into law by President Washington. Gadsby's Tavern, located in Alexandria, Virginia, popular meeting place following the Revolutionary War. George Washington frequented the tavern. Okay. Myth, the White House. George Washington never lived in the White House. Washington selected the site for the White House in 1791, but it took 8 years to build. So President John Adams and his wife Abigail were the first to move in. I did know that. Francois Joseph Paul de Grasse, French admiral who aided George Washington in the Battle of Yorktown, which ended the Revolutionary War. These are really cool. And they look really good, too. I don't know if you can tell that. But they've just done a really good job with these. The formal schooling of George Washington. George Washington received little formal schooling as a child. His father died when Washington was 11, so he was unable to travel abroad to study, as most well-to-do young men of colonial Virginia did. Since his mother never remarried, Washington was forced to take on many duties of the estate. That makes sense. Okay, I guess we flip this over here. Washington's dogs. Commander-in-Chief. He became Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army on June 19th, 1775. The Battle of Kip's Bay. Oh, I'm seeing something with foil here. The Battle of Kip's Bay, September 15th, 1776, was an amphibious landing of British troops on American soil on the East River shore of Manhattan. George Washington de Lafayette. George Washington Louis Gilbert de Lafayette was the son of Marquis de Lafayette and named in honor of his good friend, father figure, and future president George Washington. George's childhood was filled with visits from Benjamin Franklin and John and Abigail Adams. He traveled to America to attend Harvard and was a house guest of George Washington. He had his own distinguished military career. Wow. The Treaty of New York. Oh. Treaty of New York in 1790 was made between the Creek Indians at Rock Landing and the U.S. Secretary of War Henry Knox. It was the first treaty that was not held in Indian control land. Creek leaders gave up a significant portion of their hunting grounds and agreed to turn in runaway slaves, although the Creek people may not have done so. I would hope not. I hope they didn't. Kentucky. Kentucky was originally part of Virginia. At that time, 1788, George Washington bought 5,000 acres of Kentucky, I don't know if you pronounce it Kentucky, land, from Colonel High Lee of Magnolia. The deed said he paid 600 pounds for the land, but really he paid for the land with an Arabian stud horse named Magnolio. The land he purchased was located in Grayson County, Kentucky. Washington's cousin. Okay. There's a connection there, I suppose. Washington's burial site. Oh, am I? Yeah, okay. Washington's burial site. George Washington died on December 14th, 1799, leaving instructions that he should be buried at Mount Vernon in a brick tomb he designed when it was finished being constructed. Okay. And then we're going to look at this foil card, and then we'll read about the cherry tree. Washington State. I don't know if all Washington State cards are foil. I don't think they are, because this one's numbered. 1 of 99. 1 of 199. So that's going in a sleeve for sure. Well, that's very cool. Let's see. I don't think it specifically mentions foil cards on here. I don't see it mentioning foil cards. That's interesting. All right, and then we're going to read about the myth of the cherry tree. Presumably he didn't chop one down. This story is a fabrication by Washington's first biographer, Mason Locke Weems, in the book's 5th edition, published in 1806. So just 7 years after his death. Let's keep going here. Oh, there's George Washington himself. Was a surveyor, soldier, statesman, founding father, and the first president of the United States. His inheritance, skills as a surveyor, and family connections enabled him to become a successful land speculator and got him his position in Virginia's House of Burgesses. His successful experience in the French and Indian War led to his appointment as the commander of the Revolutionary War, which led to his first being voted the first president of the United States. Washington has been called the father of the nation for his manifold leadership in the formative days of the country. Edward Braddock, 1695 to 1755, British Major General. Oh. Died in the French... I guess he died in the French and Indian War, leaving George Washington in command. William Billy Lee. Okay, so William Billy Lee was a slave who served as George Washington's personal assistant and valet. He also fought beside Washington during the American Revolution and served as his huntsman during fox hunts. He was the only one of George Washington's slaves who was freed immediately upon George Washington's death in 1799. The remaining slaves were freed on Martha Washington's death. Wow. That's sad in multiple ways. But I'm sure he protected George Washington when he really needed it. All right, the Battle of the Assunption Assunpink Creek, also known as the Second Battle of Trenton. Okay. 1777. The Molland House. Molland House in Pennsylvania became General George Washington's headquarters in the summer of 1777 for about 2 weeks. The Thanksgiving Proclamation. Yes. George Washington proclaimed on October 3rd, 1789, that Thursday, November 26th, 1789, be a public Thanksgiving, becoming the first president to do so. Subsequent presidents proclaimed different days as Thanksgiving until Lincoln in 1863 established the national holiday as the last Thursday in November. Awesome. The whiskey tax became law in 1791, the first tax imposed on a domestic product. This tax was intended to offset the large Revolutionary War debt. Although the tax was on all distilled spirits, it became known as the whiskey tax because that was what most people drank. Mount Vernon Distillery. Myth, battlefield victories. Myth, Washington won many battlefield victories. Contrary to what most people think, George Washington lost many of the battles he fought. In fact, the American Revolution was almost lost until Nathanael Greene's victories in the South and the French intervened. Washington did have a number of strategic victories, such as the Battle of Trenton, that reinvigorated his troops at a pivotal moment in the war to keep them engaged. And I'm pretty sure I knew that too. There was certainly a turning point where the victories started coming. I do wonder, like, let's say before the Battle of Trenton, how many would be considered wins and how many would be considered losses? That would be kind of an interesting thing to look at. And Thomas Paine. He wrote Common Sense and the American Crisis pamphlets and swayed the American public to the idea of revolt and freedom from Britain. Because Paine's writings advocated the rights of citizens to overthrow their government, workers' rights, and criticism of slavery and corruption, his work was suppressed by governments and he was nearly executed in Paris. James Monroe was able to get Paine released from prison, and Paine died a poor man in the United States. Well, he certainly contributed a lot. George Washington's birthday. The Battle of Monongahela. That's the one we were reading about. John Hancock had a very successful trading business in Boston. British regulations like the Stamp Act and Townshend duties were so onerous that Hancock may have taken to smuggling goods into the colonies. And of course, we know he's the one that signed the Declaration. Hancock was the first to sign the Declaration of Independence, and big, so that King George could read it even without his glasses. I love that. The Great Seal of the United States. The Great Seal originated on July 4, 1776, when the Continental Congress named a committee to design it, so they would have a symbol to officially sign international treaties and transactions. 6 years and many versions later, the Congress finally accepted a heraldic design drawn by Pierre Eugene du something. That was very cool. And we've stuck with it to this day, pretty much. I mean, it might have changed a little bit. Winter encampment at Valley Forge. I know that was a big deal. They barely survived. Following a series of morale-crushing losses that left the 12,000 patriots hungry, cold, and helpless, The brutal conditions at the Valley Forge encampment were a true test of American will. Over 2,000 Continental soldiers died due to lack of proper hygiene, food, sanitation, and medical knowledge. North Carolina. One of the original 13 colonies, North Carolina became the 12th state in the Union on November 21st, 1789. The Bill of Rights. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution of the United States. These amendments were written to address objections raised to the Constitution by the Anti-Federalists. They include specific guarantees of personal freedoms and rights, including freedom of religion, speech, assembly, and limits on the government's power. The last amendment assigns any unassigned powers to the states or the people. The Bill of Rights was ratified on December 15th, 1791. There was a lot of discussion because some of the things in the Bill of Rights were kind of assumed to be true anyway, but those anti-federalists wanted it written down. The Athenaeum portrait, 1796, never completed. Stewart used the unfinished painting as a reference to produce 130 copies, which he sold at $100 apiece. Wow. Myth, so help me God. It is possible that Washington added the phrase, so help me God, to the end of the oath of office for the presidency. However, this was not recorded until after his death, and scholars still debate it. Evidence does exist that he kissed the Bible after taking the oath. Okay. And then is this foil too? 49 of 49. It's something. The Battle of Harlem Heights. Yeah, I don't know. This wouldn't be lenticular. It's definitely not die cut. It seems there's some variations that they didn't put on the package. This is very cool. All right, the Battle of Harlem Heights, September 16th, 1776. In northern Manhattan was General George Washington's first battlefield success of the Revolutionary War. The battle raged for several hours, with the British beginning a retreat as ammunition dwindled. The retreat restored morale to the Patriots, who had suffered many previous defeats. Sally Carey Fairfax was a grand belle in Virginia society who married George William Fairfax of Virginia's largest landowning family. Sally became good friends with young George Washington. She taught him manners, conversational skills, and how to dance the minuet. Despite a few flirtatious letters to Sally, Washington married Martha Dandridge Custis. In 1773, the Fairfaxes, loyalists to the crown, left for England never to return. Sally regretted that she didn't marry Washington near the end of her life. She wrote to her sister-in-law, "I know now that the worthy man is to be preferred to the highborn, who has not merit to recommend him." At the end of his life, Washington wrote to Sally, "None of which events, however, nor all of them together, have been able to eradicate from my mind the recollection of those happy moments, the happiest of my life, which I have enjoyed in your company." And then we have Martha. Martha Custis Washington was George Washington's wife and the inaugural First Lady of the United States. Washington was Martha's second husband, Previously, she had married and had 4 children with Daniel Parke Custis and was widowed at age 26. Custis left her a very wealthy widow. 2 years later, she married Washington. Martha followed Washington to his winter encampments and helped keep morale among the officers. She was an early celebrity with press reports about her travel. Towns greeted her arrival by ringing bells. General Lafayette observed that Martha loves her husband madly. They were interred together at Mount Vernon in a crypt George Washington designed. Henry Knox was the first United States Secretary of War under George Washington. Again, I'm not going to read all of these because my voice is going to not do well. Fort Lee was originally Fort Constitution in New Jersey and is the site of George Washington's encampment in the summer of 1776. Defeat and surrender at Yorktown. The final battle of the American Revolution was a joint Franco-American land and sea campaign that trapped the British Army on a peninsula at Yorktown, Virginia. The Continental Army, commanded by General Washington and the Marquis de Lafayette, was aided by the French, commanded by Comte de Rochambeau, totaling as many as 17,800 troops. Lieutenant General Charles Cornwallis led approximately 10,000 British troops. Cornwallis was forced to surrender, although he refused to attend the surrender ceremony. Instead, he sent a deputy, Brigadier General O'Hara, who attempted to surrender to French General Rochambeau, who refused and pointed to General Washington. O'Hara then offered his sword to Washington, who also refused, and motioned to his second in command, Benjamin Lincoln. Lincoln accepted the sword of Cornwallis's deputy. You're going to send your second in command? Well, he's going to surrender to my second in command. That's funny. John Jay was a founding fathers and wrote articles for the Federalist Papers that advocated for a strong federal government. The Battle of Fallen Timbers. I'm not going to read that one. Ooh, the $1 bill. The paper dollar first became legal tender in 1862 and bore the portrait of Secretary of the Treasury Salmon P. Chase. The first $1 bill to bear President George Washington's likeness was printed in 1869, so only 7 years later. The $1 bill has changed in size and appearance over the 150 years, but Washington remains on the currency, which makes up roughly 31% of all currency produced in the U.S. Every post is honorable in which a man can serve his country. True dat. Oh. So George Washington wrote that to Major General Benedict Arnold. Washington was writing about his officers bickering amongst themselves regarding their rank within the Continental Army. Washington was suggesting how Arnold could talk to his men to diffuse the conflict. Well, we know what happened to Benedict Arnold, because that's a name, that's a thing now. Sir Henry Clinton was a British officer who also sat in the British House of Commons. He was the British commander-in-chief in North America during the Revolutionary War, following the resignation of General William Howe from that post in 1777. He served for 4 years, ending with the disastrous surrender at Yorktown to the Americans. Wow. All right, let's get back to opening these cards here. Madeira. Washington's capture. Was never captured in battle and surrendered only once following his defeat at the Battle of Fort Necessity. The surrender terms were written in French, and Washington signed them unaware that he He had admitted to assassinating French-Canadian Forces leader Jumonville. Whoops. Samuel Adams. One of the founding fathers. As a Bostonian, he was vocal about the Boston Massacre and taxes. He was also the man who nominated George Washington as Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army during the Second Continental Congress. He served as governor of Massachusetts after the war, but retired from politics in 1797. I've watched a good bit of the 1776 musical, and in that he is certainly a character. Declaration of Independence, July 4th, 1776. Although adopted on July 4th, the Declaration of Independence was first read publicly on July 8th. The bell, now known as the Liberty Bell, rang out to summon citizens to the Pennsylvania State House to hear the words penned by Thomas Jefferson that listed the grievances against King George. Jefferson later said, "The object of the Declaration of Independence was not to find out new principles or new arguments never thought of, not merely to say things which had never been said before, but to place before mankind the common sense of the subject, in terms so plain and firm as to command their assent, and to justify ourselves in the independent stand we were compelled to take." Yeah. And as one of the previous cards said, it took, 100 more years almost to get freedom for the slaves in the way that America got freedom. And then we still had civil rights after that. Horatio Gates was one of the Revolution's most controversial figures. He led a decisive victory against the British at the Battle of Saratoga, then refused to credit General Benedict Arnold, who had played a large part. Gates was a member of the Conway Cabal, which unsuccessfully tried to discredit and replace General George Washington. At the Battle of Camden, one of the largest American defeats of the war, as the American troops retreated, Gates left the battlefield and abandoned his army. Wow. Not good, my man, not good. The Federal Hall. Federal Hall in New York City is where George Washington took the oath of office and where the first United States Congress met. It was also home to the Supreme Court and the presidential offices. It is now a museum that honors the early days of America. First State of the Union address, January 8, 1790. He addressed the controversial issue of establishing a standing army, asserting that to be prepared for war is one of the most effectual means of preserving peace. Washington went on to suggest that Congress should fund and support efforts to protect the interest of the United States in foreign affairs and consider domestic issues including immigration, the establishment of a national currency and standard of weights and measures, and the establishment of a post office and system of education. Tennessee. Tennessee became a state on June 1st, 1796. Initially a part of North Carolina, Tennessee was later a part of the Southwest Territory. It was the 16th state admitted to the Union. The basis of our political system is the right of the people to make and to alter their constitutions of government. 1796 in his presidential farewell address. Mount Vernon Plantation. The land at the Mount Vernon estate had been in the Washington family since 1674. The original four-room house was built by Washington's father Augustine around 1734. As with many of the palatial homes of the day, Mount Vernon was built by slaves and indentured servants. Okay, for some reason this has a number, 1 of 699. I'm guessing this is because it's in full color. So I'm going to have to look back through these cards and see if there are other ones that are numbered. It's interesting. So I will do that later. Okay. The rules of civility and decent behavior is a list of 110 etiquette rules composed by French Jesuits in 1595. The rules were popular during Washington's time and are well known today because George Washington copied them word for word as a handwriting exercise around 1744. He regularly referred to them and is believed to memorize the whole set. George Washington's wedding. Wow. Martha Custis, age 27, and George Washington, age 26, married on January 6, 1759, at the Custis family's White House plantation. The wedding was, I guess the name White House is interesting. The wedding was grand. Washington's suit was of blue and silver cloth with red trimming and gold knee buckles. The bride wore a yellow silk damask gown with cream silk petticoats. That's a lot of details. Sir Henry Clinton was a British officer who sat in the British House of Commons. He was the British commander-in-chief in North America during the Revolutionary War, following the resignation of Howe from that post in 1777. I think I already looked at that card. The Battle of Fort Washington took place near the north end of Manhattan Island and was one of the worst defeats of the American Revolution. This battle followed George Washington's defeat at White Plains. Fort Washington was the last Patriot stronghold in New York, being attacked from three sides by combined British Hessian forces of 8,000 men, and with the outer works of Fort Washington breached, American Colonel Robert McGaw, with 3,000 men, was forced to surrender. Okay, we've definitely looked at him and him. The Neutrality Proclamation. George Washington issued a statement on April 22nd, 1793, declaring the United States as neutral in the conflict between Great Britain and France. While most supported the proclamation, Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson suggested that the warring countries bid financially for America's neutrality, but Washington refused. Washington Place, Hawaii. Washington Place in Honolulu, Hawaii, has served as the home of Queen Liliuokalani and as the governor's residence, but it was built as a private home. Recently widowed Mary Jones Dominus used a part of it for boarders. Okay. Anthony Ten Eyck named the house for Washington and used it for diplomatic activities. It is better to be alone than in bad company. 1748. He wrote that at age 16 in a penmanship exercise. Yeah, again, is that really one of his thoughts, or was he just copying down the rules of civility and decent behavior? The Battle of White Plains, we just learned that was a major defeat. The Battle of White Plains had British General Howe and the British Army soundly defeating the Continental Army and forced George Washington and his troops to retreat from New York City. Washington's estate, I'm going to skip that one. The Battle of Jumonville Glen, 1754, the opening salvo in the French and Indian War. Okay. Little Hunting Creek. Little Hunting Creek is a tidal tributary to the Potomac River in Fairfax County, Virginia. Mount Vernon Plantation was built along the banks of Little Hunting Creek on land owned by Washington's grandfather. Annis Boudinot Stockton, I don't know how you say that, except Stockton. A published poet from New Jersey, she was one of the first women to be published in the colonies. Her husband, Richard, was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. The couple often entertained prominent figures, including George Washington, who subsequently developed his own friendship with Mrs. Stockton. She wrote him both letters and poems. The Cabinet of Advisors. Washington established a tradition of a presidential cabinet of advisors. He had 4 members: Thomas Jefferson as Secretary of State, Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of Treasury, Henry Knox, Secretary of War, and Edmund Randolph, Attorney General. Modern presidential cabinets have 16 members. Washington, D.C. was established as the nation's capital in 1790 at a site chosen by George Washington. Maryland and Virginia both ceded land for the project. The city was initially designed by Pierre Charles L'Enfant, who created a focal point of the Capitol building, but planning was taken over by Andrew Ellicott. The district was named for George Washington and for Columbia, a symbol of the United States whose place was usurped by the Statue of Liberty. Washington's farewell address. We already read a little bit about that. That was in 1796. Guard against the impostures of pretended patriotism. And pay attention to the motives of politicians. Interesting. And there's the quote, guard against the impostures of pretended patriotism. Oh, there we have that same card. And here's Ben Franklin, the most accomplished American of his age and the most influential in inventing the type of society America would become. Franklin was the only person to sign all 3 founding documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Treaty of Paris. Franklin was the first Postmaster General and founded the University of Pennsylvania. At the end of his life, he advocated for the education and freedom of slaves. Looks like this is another numbered one. I don't know why. Oh, maybe the other Tennessee one is different? Let's take a look back, if I can find it here. Yeah. Oh, it's gold. Okay. There's a red border and there's a gold border. That's why. Okay. Well, let's just flip through here and see if we see any more gold borders. There's a gold border. There's a gold border of Thomas Paine. There's a gold border of de Grasse. Gold border of Houdon. Okay. So that's what's going on there. So there's alternate versions that have a gold ribbon. And Ben Franklin is gold. Battle of White Plains, gold. Okay. Now we know what's going on here. Okay, I do want to look at this because I think all of mine are numbered 1 of 699. So I wonder if that means, you know, the next person's box either got different cards or they got like 2 of 699. I wonder how that works. Okay. So we've got foil to 199. I don't know what to call this, but it's out of 49. It's really cool looking, but I don't know what to call it. It's shiny the whole way across, but it's not foil. That's out of 49. And then these gold ribbon cards are out of $6.99. Okay, so now back to our pack. Lawrence Washington. Did we learn about him already? The older half-brother of George Washington. Lawrence Washington inherited Mount Vernon in his father's will. Lawrence founded the city of Alexandria, Virginia, was a member of the Ohio Company of Virginia, and introduced a future president to the wealthy and powerful Fairfax family. He died of tuberculosis at 34, leaving Mount Vernon to his brother George. Fort Duquesne was built in the Ohio River Valley by the French in 1754 and played an important role in both the French and Indian War and the 7 Years' War. Paul Revere. Paul Revere was a master silversmith who took part in the Boston Tea Party. Then at 10 at night on April 18th, 1775, Revere rode his horse through Lexington, warning all that the British were coming. His signal of 2 lanterns in the belfry of the Old North Church let everyone know that the British were arriving by sea. Love it. The Battle of Long Island, I'm going to skip that one. Nelson. Nelson was George Washington's favorite horse, a chestnut and chrome charger, 16 hands high. Toro Synagogue. George Washington wrote a letter to the congregation of the Toro Synagogue in Newport, Rhode Island in August 1790. The letter was both a thank you for their hospitality and an assurance that all religions were welcome in the new country and that bigotry and persecution were rejected. For happily the government of the United States gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, requires only that they who live under its protection should demean themselves as good citizens, in giving it on all occasions their effectual support. The first presidential veto. George Washington used the presidential veto for the first time on April 5th, 1792, refusing to endorse a bill that would have increased the number of seats in the House of Representatives, favoring the northern states. Thomas Jefferson persuaded Washington to use the veto. Now, we might think that would be maybe if he hadn't done that, then slavery would have ended sooner, and that's certainly possible. But I've been learning about how, learning through my whole life, but especially recently, learning about how the Northerners were, yes, against slavery, but they weren't, like, pro-black necessarily. They weren't, I don't know. They weren't supportive of black Christians, for example, in the North. Washington's death. Died on December 14th, 1799. He caught a cold on December 12th, which deteriorated into chest congestion and difficulty breathing. Yeah, if it's basically a cold or even the flu, they probably should have just left him alone since they didn't have really good medicine, And I don't think they knew about vitamins, so that's tough. Asked Betsy Ross to sew the flag. It's a myth. Okay. Well, then what really happened? No one really okay. It's not a myth per se. It's just no one really knows. No one really knows if George Washington asked Betsy Ross to sew the first American flag. Some historians believe it could have happened the way her grandson William Canby said, but there is no proof. Flag Committee member George Ross was Betsy's uncle-in-law, and she had made other items for the Washingtons. Okay, I don't understand what the last sentence has to do with anything. We just don't know for sure. Which is a good place to be historically, you know? Like, we need to be able to admit when we don't know for sure. It would be nice if we had some documentation. Ferry Farm, I'm going to skip that one. Turned down by British Army. George Washington served more than 40 years as a soldier. He began his career in the Virginia militia during the French and Indian War. When he applied for a commission in the British Army, he was turned down and returned to Mount Vernon to farm his land. He used what he learned in the militia to help the Continental Army as a general in the Revolutionary War. Okay, a card about the whole war, apparently. Estimates suggest that approximately 100,000 men fought in the Continental Army, plus 200,000 in the militia. Approximately 20% of the male population of the colonies was involved in fighting the war. Wow. Rhode Island was the first of the 13 original colonies to renounce allegiance to the throne, but the last to ratify the United States Constitution after boycotting the 1787 convention where it was created. West Point is the oldest continuously occupied military post in the United States. George Washington considered it to be the most important strategic position in America. The place agreed upon to obstruct the navigation of Hudson. The place agreed upon to obstruct the navigation of Hudson River was at West Point. The defenses of West Point were designed by Polish military engineer something, who served as brigadier general in the Continental Army. Wow. The Residence Act of 1790, I'm going to skip that one. Election of 1792. Was elected to a second term of office in 1792. The vote for Washington was unanimous in the Electoral College. John Adams was reelected as vice president, besting Governor George Clinton of New York, 77 to 50. So yeah, in those days, the vice president was elected separately. And that's why you could have a vice president that disagreed with the president pretty demonstrably sometimes. George Washington suffered from tapophobia, the fear of being buried alive. It was not an uncommon fear at the time, as crude medical equipment could not always detect life, and people were occasionally buried alive. Well, I can understand that. The myth of wooden teeth. George Washington had notoriously bad teeth, possibly as a result of the mercury chloride which he was given to treat his smallpox. He had many substitutes for his missing teeth, however, none of them were wooden. He wore dentures made from hippopotamus ivory, carved bone, and other materials. Jeffersonian Republican Party. And this is another one of 699. That's the gold. It keeps looking like the corners are damaged, but they're not. Oh no, that one was. It was bent up for some reason. Well, that's annoying. I'm gonna have to be careful, make sure that I'm not the one damaging it when I open the package. An anti-federalist movement that opposed a stronger U.S. federal government at the expense of states' rights. They wanted a strict interpretation of the Constitution and did not want to ratify the 1787 Constitution until the Bill of Rights was added to address their concerns. Okay. Freemason Washington. I think I knew about that, but what's the real deal? Freemasonry is a self-improvement association that teaches moral, intellectual, and spiritual lessons. George Washington joined in 1753. The French and Indian War, fought by the 13 British colonies against the French colonies. It began with a dispute in 1754 over control of the forks of the Ohio, the confluence of the Allegheny River and Monongahela River. The war's first battle was the Battle of Jumonville Glen, during which Virginia militiamen under the command of George Washington ambushed a French patrol. The Great Dismal Swamp. I'm going to skip that one. Thomas Paine, we already read about him, I think on the gold card. The Battle of Germantown. October 4, 1777 was a major engagement in the Philadelphia campaign of the American Revolutionary War. Although it was an American defeat, the determined nature of the Continental soldiers helped bring France into the war on the American side. His inaugural address. The inauguration of George Washington as the first president of the United States was held on the balcony of Federal Hall in New York City nearly 2 months after beginning his term. Then Washington went into the Senate chamber to deliver his inaugural address. In the address, Washington humbly warned about his own deficiencies, talked about the workings of an almighty being in the achievement of the independence of the United States and the formulation of a constitution by the voluntary consent of so many distinct communities. It only took 10 minutes to deliver. The President's House in Philadelphia. I'm going to skip that one. Ona Wunnie Judge was Martha Washington's mixed-race enslaved seamstress and personal maid. At age 22, she escaped from President Washington's Philadelphia household in 1796. She was found in New Hampshire, however. Washington did not have her retrieved and brought home because of the bad publicity that would bring. Should I say Oni, maybe, if it's Ona? We'll say Oni. Oni said she would rather die than return to slavery. After her final attempt to reclaim her in 1799, Washington died, and Judge lived out the rest of her life as an unsought fugitive in New Hampshire. She married, had 3 children, taught herself to read and write, and died in 1848. Well, hopefully her descendants did well. That's like, did not have her retrieved, but then did try to reclaim her later. That's so weird. It's better to offer no excuse than a bad one. Is that another one of the... wrote to his 15-year-old niece. Okay. And here's another foil one for the Militia Acts of 1792. Okay. Did I miss? Oh, I did miss it. This was a gold one. Betty Washington Lewis was the only sister of George Washington to survive to adulthood. She shared her brother's passion for patriotism and contributed financially to the patriot cause with her husband Frederick. She also handled both George's and their mother's estates when Mary Ball Washington died and George Washington was elected president. The 7 Years' War, the first global conflict in history, a struggle for world supremacy between Great Britain and France. In Europe, the conflict arose from issues left unresolved by the War of the Austrian Succession, with Prussia seeking greater dominance. Long-standing colonial rivalries pitting Britain against France and Spain in North America, and the Caribbean islands were fought on a grand scale with consequential results. Elizabeth Willing Powell was a Philadelphia socialite and a confidant to George Washington. She helped convince him to stay for a second term as President of the United States. She was married to Samuel Powell, a two-time mayor of Philadelphia. The Battle of Dorchester Heights. I'm going to skip that one. William Howe, Commander-in-Chief of the British Land Forces. His first battle was Bunker Hill, which he won while suffering tremendous casualties. He also captured New York City and Philadelphia during the war. He resigned in 1777 and returned to Britain. And he had no heirs. The Naturalization Act of 1790 established that any free white person who had lived in the United States for 2 years would be able to apply for citizenship. Nonpartisanship. George Washington is the only president with no party affiliation. Although he had clear Federalist Party leanings, he did not like political parties and was elected both times without declaring an affiliation. In his farewell address, he even warned against putting party over the greater good. Cheating death. Yeah, I like this because he did cheat death a couple of times, I think. Was not the sickliest president to serve, but he did escape death several times over his lifetime. During the French and Indian War, 2 horses were shot out from under him. His coat had 4 bullet holes, and his hat had 1 bullet hole after battles. Washington was unharmed in each of these incidents. He survived smallpox, tuberculosis, malaria, and dysentery. He wrote, "I have been protected beyond all human probability or expectation." Washington was also plagued with throat infections, which eventually led to his demise. Washington slept here. I'm going to skip that myth card, although I'm sure that's kind of interesting. The Copyright Act of 1790, and this is gold. Again, it's one of 699. The Copyright Act of 1790 was signed into law by President George Washington. It provided copyright protection for American maps, charts, and books for 14 years, with an opportunity to renew for another 14 years if the inventor was still alive. Of course, copyright has changed a lot over the years. Horseback riding, I'm going to skip that one. Interior design. He expanded and upgraded Mount Vernon during the years he lived there, choosing bold colors and innovative designs for nearly all of the 21 rooms. Edmund Randolph. I feel like we might have... No. Okay. Seventh governor of Virginia and a delegate from Virginia to the Constitutional Convention. He was the first United States Attorney General. Okay, we did read about him, but I don't think we saw his card yet. The Battle of White Plains. So this is the regular card versus the foil. No. Didn't we have a foil? I'm confused. Charles Cornwallis, the general who commanded British forces against the Patriots during the Revolutionary War. He was successful in many battles, but eventually surrendered in 1781. Well, technically he didn't, right? He sent his second in command. The Mules of Mount Vernon, let's skip that one. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1793. Ugh. Legislated by Congress in 1793, the first Fugitive Slave Act gave local governments the right to capture and return escaped slaves to their owners. It was passed by the House of Representatives on February 4th, 1793, by a vote of 48-7. with 14 abstaining. It also penalized anyone who may have aided the escape. See, look at that vote. That wasn't just the southern states. The Washington Monument. Designed by Robert Mills, the 555-foot hollow marble obelisk was built in D.C. to honor George Washington. George Washington on horseback is a gilded bronze equestrian statue by sculptor Herbert Chevalier Hasseltine, completed in 1959. And then I think this is a foil version of the Athenaeum portrait. Yeah, numbered out of 199. There's the Mount Vernon plantation again. I assume this is the regular. Yep. Statesman Washington. He served as a major in the Virginia militia, colonel in the Virginia regiment, and commanded the Continental Army as a lieutenant general during the American Revolution. Ooh, Benedict Arnold. America's first trader, rose to the rank of Major General in the Continental Army and was a trusted advisor of George Washington. His contributions to the Patriots were invaluable. In 1780, disappointed with not being promoted, resenting other officers, in debt, and influenced by his Tory wife, Arnold switched to the British side and hatched a plot to surrender West Point on the Hudson River. Washington discovered his plan before he could follow through, and Arnold just barely escaped aboard the British ship HMS Vulture. He died of gout and dropsy in London at age 60. The Battle of Pell's Point. I'm going to skip that one. Siege of Yorktown. A joint Franco-American land and sea campaign that trapped the British Army on a peninsula in Yorktown, Virginia. The Continental Army. Oh, I think I've read this one already. American Foxhounds. Jeffersonian Republican Party. I'm going to skip those. Charles Washington. I don't think we read this one yet. The youngest brother of George Washington and a prominent Virginia planter. Their father died when Charles was only 4 years old. When Charles reached the legal age, he inherited 750 acres of land in Spotsylvania County, Virginia, per his late father's will, and married Mildred Thornton. They had 4 children, including Samuel Washington, who would become one of the executors of George Washington's estate. Charles inherited another 200 acres of land when Lawrence died in 1752. Most of this was farmland developed by enslaved labor. Myth: Washington was Catholic. I think we know that from another card that he was a deist. One legend holds that on his deathbed, Washington summoned the Catholic priest Leonard Neal to his home. It was said that the night before his death, several of Washington's slaves were sent to St. Thomas Manor in Maryland by rowboat, where they found Neal, the Jesuit manor superior. They ferried Neal to Mount Vernon, where he heard Washington's confession, conditionally baptized him, and received him into the Catholic Church. A 19th century Catholic historian, Martin I.J. Griffin, concluded that this is doubtful. Interesting. The basis of our political system is the right of the people to make and to alter their constitutions of government. We've seen this card, but this is the gold version. The birth of George Washington. I feel like we've read this before, but I'm not sure. Was born on February 22nd, 1732 at Pope's Creek. He was the first child. I mean, we certainly know all of this from reading the other cards. Fort Necessity. The Battle of Fort Necessity was fought on July 3rd, 1754 during the French and Indian War. Oversaw the building of the fort. Patrick Henry. Nice. Best known for his famous words, "Give me liberty or give me death." Henry was also a major force behind the Bill of Rights. He was concerned that if the federal government became too strong, the colonists would face the same type of tyranny they had under Britain. Henry served as the first governor of Virginia in 1776 and supported the Revolution by supplying soldiers and equipment to George Washington. Served a total of 5 terms as Virginia governor. Evacuation of Fort Lee, we'll skip that one. Marquis de Lafayette, let's read about him. He was 19 when he came over from France to join the American Revolution in 1777. He served as a general and helped secure vital resources from France. When he was wounded at the Battle of Brandywine, Washington instructed doctors to treat him as if he were his son. Lafayette helped to corner Lord Cornwallis in the Siege of Yorktown, the final battle of the Revolutionary War. After the war, Lafayette went back to France and fought for a democratic republic in the French Revolution. Lafayette named his only son George Washington Lafayette and sent Washington a key to the Bastille as a sign of his friendship. Wow. Judiciary Act, the Bank Bill, Treaty of Tripoli. I'm going to skip those. We got another foil one here. "'Tis Well." George Washington's dying words to his secretary Tobias Lear. He was confirming that Lear understood his last request to be decently buried, and do not let my body be put into the vault less than 3 days after I am dead. Do you understand me? Yeah. Because of that fear of being buried alive, right? All right, we have a foil version of the Battle of Paoli. Does that mean it's from the French and Indian War? No, 1777. Maybe I haven't seen this card yet. Relatively few American casualties, claims were made that the British stabbed and burned Americans who tried to surrender. The engagement became known as the Paoli Massacre. I don't think I've heard of this one. Oh, got a die cut. Okay. George Washington, card number 1. Bushrod Washington. The Continental Congress, we've seen that one before. Battle of Harlem Heights, we've seen that before. Defeat and surrender at Yorktown. And then we have a die cut here of Mount Washington. Wow. For more information on this mountain, scan this code with your device's camera. Okay, and it has 2 lines in it. Does that mean there's supposed to be like a stand for it to go in or something? I don't understand. But we're going to put it in a sleeve right now, just in case. Well, that's pretty cool, Mount Washington. Some of my family have climbed Mount Washington. I have not. Very nice. I will try to figure out what is supposed to be done with this card, why it has the 2 lines on it. It looks like it's supposed to go in a stand. All right, let's look at the rest of the cards here. Guess we'll put this here. We read about the synagogue and about nonpartisanship, and we have the portrait. So we've got duplicates. We've also got, ooh, this one's heavy. This one has something special in it. Feels like a coin. Very cool. Real quick, before we open it, I'm just going to look at this. Washington coin card, 1 in 550. So it's more likely to get a historic site dirt relic. Oh, it could be a challenge coin. Well, hopefully it's a Washington coin. Okay, we've got the myth of the wooden teeth again. And here is John Adams, Vice President, 2022 Historic Autographs. So I think this is the less rare challenge coin, but it's still pretty cool looking. John Adams was a founding father of the United States and its second president. Okay, so it still has some nice background information on it. I'm guessing the CC and the number means challenge coin. So, I have some thick sleeves here. Yeah, there we go. I don't think my thickest card holders will work. I probably need something thicker for this. So I'm just gonna have to take really good care of it for the time being. Although I think I could put it in one of my I could put it in one of these for the time being, the Card Saver 4s, until I can get a thicker top loader. Just kind of keep it like that for now. Well, that is awesome. It's very cool looking. Challenge coin number 13. All right, let's put that there. So again, that's 1 in 29 packs. And how many packs is in a box? I don't remember. Oh, here we go. On the box, there's a cut this out cut on the dotted lines and shape into a circle to hold the monument card upright. I might do that, I might not. Question is, do I want to sell some of these? Like, do I want to sell that card or do I want to put it on display? Okay, we've got a few more packs. We're going to go through them faster because we've seen most of this already. Or we've read about it on a different card, right? Virginia House of Burgesses, we know a lot about that by now. The letter writing by Washington. I mean, he wrote a lot of letters. May have written as many as 20,000 letters during his lifetime. He was a meticulous record keeper, so many of his papers still exist. Alexander Hamilton, first Secretary of the Treasury. Hamilton's accomplishments have been undervalued for many years, but a greater appreciation of his deeds has come about over the past few decades. He was the founder of the American financial system, the author of the Federalist Papers, and the founder of the Federalist Party. He fought in the American Revolution and helped draft the Constitution. Was famously killed during a duel with Aaron Burr. The Battle of Harlem Heights. Rochambeau. Was the French general in command of the French army in North America who played an important role in the Patriots' win at the Siege of Yorktown. He and General George Washington marched their troops to Yorktown together and joined up with the Marquis de Lafayette's troops and trapped General Cornwallis. He returned to France and died at Thor-la-Rochette during the Napoleon's rule during Napoleon's rule or the Napoleon's rule, at the age of 81. Tobias Lear, I don't know if we've read about him yet. Personal secretary from 1784 until death in 1799. He was also a tutor to Washington's grandchildren. Got in trouble for pocketing rents that he collected for Washington and a business partner. He married Martha Washington's niece. He recorded Washington's last words as "'tis well." The Militia Acts of 1792. And this is what I found curious. I may have known this. This is one of those historical facts that maybe you hear once and then forget. But I saw him on the family tree. Confederate General Robert E. Lee married George Washington's step-great-granddaughter, Mary Anna Randolph Custis. Okay, so he was... Maybe it's because of this weird tie that I forgot about it. Lee was an exceptional officer in the United States military until the secession of his home state, Virginia, at the beginning of the Civil War. He became the commander of the Confederate Army despite his desire for the Union to remain whole and his ties to the Union Army, saying, "I can anticipate no greater calamity for the country than a dissolution of the Union." So he was related by marriage twice, because the woman he married was a descendant of Washington's wife. Buried in the Capitol crypt. He was not buried in the Capitol crypt. Yes, he was buried at his home. There was a place for him to be buried under the rotunda, but he did not want that to be his final resting place. And then Gold Gadsby's Tavern. Francis Swamp Fox Marion. I don't know if we've seen this one yet. One of the fathers of modern guerrilla warfare. He served in the South Carolina militia and in the Continental Army during the American Revolution, leading bands of guerrillas. He was known as the Swamp Fox because he would elude his followers by traveling along Carolina swamp paths. He specialized in surprise attacks and sudden withdrawals. Fort Necessity. Paul Revere. The Battle of Trenton. The Battle of Quinton's Bridge. Oh, and we've got one of those lenticulars. A lenticular about Molly Fitzhugh Custis. Married George Custis on July 7th, 1804. Molly Lee Fitzhugh was the daughter of one of George Washington's close friends, William Fitzhugh, and a cousin of Thomas Jefferson. She married George Custis, George Washington's step-grandson. Fitzhugh was active in church causes and in the movement to eliminate slavery. Well, thank you for that. That was very cool. So I'm just going to show you that I guess it kind of alternates between kind of a blue and white version of trees and a kind of a black and white version of trees, I guess. And that sounds like someone I'd like to read more about. Okay, inaugural address. First State of the Union address. And there's Robert E. Lee again. Swamp Fox Marion. Benjamin Franklin. John Adams. Battle of the Clouds. Battle of Monmouth. Copyright Act of 1790. Coinage Act of 1792. Washington slaves. Okay. Washington inherited approximately 50 slaves from his family. In 1759, he married Martha, which gave him 84 dowered slaves. There we go. So it was dowry. By 1773, he had purchased at least 71 more slaves. Come on, George. Two of his favorite slaves escaped, his chef, Hercules, and Martha's favorite, Oni Judge, a talented seamstress. Washington sold off at least 3 slaves to the West Indies as punishment for attempting escape. In his will, Washington attempted to free his slaves, but this did not quite work out. He had not made adequate arrangements. Myth: silver dollars across the Potomac. Told as a way to show George Washington's strength, his coin toss across the Potomac River never happened. The Potomac River is about a mile wide, making the feat impossible. While never verified, Martha Washington's grandson said Washington tossed a piece of slate across the Rappahannock River, which is at least 250 feet across is more probable. Okay, and this is a foil card of the Naval Act of 1794. And it has a little blemish on it where it looks like some ink got on it. So I'm going to see. Yeah, I might not be able to get it off. That stinks. Soldier Washington, Bushrod Washington, Frances Tavern, Kidnapping General Washington, was planned by British Cavalry Lieutenant Colonel John Graves Simcoe to march by secret ways, made the more so by the inclement season, and to arrive near General Washington's quarters by daybreak, to tie up his horses in a swamp, and to storm the quarters and attack his guard on foot. During the night of February 11th, 100 plus men crossed the ice-sheeted Hudson River and Newark Bay to Paulus Hook. Ultimately, the weather became so bad that the men could not proceed. Ironically, the inability of Washington's Continentals to quickly clear the roads between Hackensack and Morristown prevented the kidnapping. The Battle of Paoli, the Federalist Papers, Anthony Wayne, nicknamed Mad Anthony for his tactical boldness and courage in battle. He was a statesman and soldier who rose to the rank of brigadier general. He served as a member of the Pennsylvania General Assembly and helped raise a militia for the state, and served at the Siege of Yorktown. The Northwest Indian War. Okay, I'll definitely have to read about that one. There is nothing which can better deserve our patronage than the promotion of science and literature. Knowledge is in every country the surest basis of public happiness. And a gold version of the Great Dismal Swamp. George Washington House in Barbados. I'm guessing that's another thing that's named for him. Is that, or did he spend time there? Let's see. Oh, they did stay there. Okay. Ice cream. George Washington regularly served ice cream to visitors at his home and offices. The French brought the delicacy to America in the 17th century, and initially only the wealthy could afford to make it or eat it. Although different in recipe to today, cream, milk, sugar, ice, and salt were required to make it, and these items were difficult to come by in the 18th century, as was the time needed to crank the maker. That makes sense. France in the Revolutionary War. Because Great Britain was France's long-established rival, France started helping the Patriots in 1776 by secretly shipping supplies to the Continental Army. During the Revolutionary War, Benjamin Franklin persuaded France to provide money, troops, armament, military leadership, and naval support that tipped the balance of military power in favor of the United States and paved the way for the United States' victory. Oliver Wolcott Jr., second United States Secretary of the Treasury, serving under President George Washington. He was also the 24th governor of Connecticut and was a pivotal figure in the Oney Judge escaped slave controversy. He was unable to convince the courts to return her to George Washington, from whom she had escaped. Well, I'm glad you failed, buddy. Resignation from Army. Resigned his commission December 23rd, 1783. Having now finished the work assigned me, I retire from the great theater of action. His retirement was short-lived, as he was enticed back to the Constitutional Convention in 1787, leading to his election as president in 1789. Election of 1788. I feel like we read this already. No, maybe we didn't. Unanimously elected the first president. The vote was held December 15th, 1788 to January 10th, 1789. It was the only presidential election to straddle 2 years. John Adams was elected as the vice president with 34 electoral votes, beating out 10 other candidates for that job. The USS Constitution is the third of the original six sister warships commissioned and named by President Washington in 1794. The 6 frigates, likely designed by Joshua Humphreys, were unusual in that they were enormous with a strong hull, timber being plentiful in the colonies, and a deep, long keel for speed. They were powerful enough to engage any warships of the French or British navies, and fast enough to evade them. The ships came in over budget. The USS Constitution was built in Boston and launched in 1797. Her first duties were to provide protection for American merchant shipping during the quasi-war with France, and to defeat the Barbary pirates in the First Barbary War. She is now the world's oldest ship afloat. So this is Old Ironsides. Where is it? Is it in Boston? I can't remember where it sits. The Treaty of Greenville, was this the settled the Northwest Indian War hostilities between the United States and Chief Little Turtle, a Sagamore of the Miami people. The Native Americans were forced to give up most of Ohio and portions of Indiana, Illinois, and Michigan in return for goods, valued at $20,000. Human happiness and moral duty are inseparably connected. Yeah. And one of those moral duties is not to enslave people. Wrote George Washington to the Protestant Episcopal Church, the new American branch of the Anglican Church. Washington was nominally a member of the Anglican Church, although in later life he did not take communion. We read about that. And then we have a gold version of Edmund Randolph. The formal schooling of George Washington. I think we talked about that. There's Fort Necessity again. Oh, there is something thick here. Samuel Adams. And a Washington coin. The Kidnapping George Washington again. Okay, look at that. That is a 1932 quarter. Wow. Very cool. Now those might not be all that rare, the quarters themselves, I don't know. But certainly in a card, this is fairly rare. Now this is a thinner card because it's just a quarter. So it should fit in one of these, I think. Maybe even in a thinner one. Yeah, we'll put it in here. This is a 130 point. Very cool. $1932 Washington quarter. So, we obviously got a ton of base cards. It does seem like this is a big set. So let me look at this book again. 220. So it's possible that you don't get a full set of base cards from one box. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We can call them chrome, we can call them foil. I'm going to call them foil cards. 5 foils. One of whatever this is, I'm going to look it up. It's not lenticular. We know this is the lenticular. It's very cool looking though. So this is numbered to 199, numbered to 49. This is the family tree of Molly Fitzhugh Custis. Numbered to 99, 45 out of 99. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 gold. And we have our die cut Mount Washington. We have our challenge coin of John Adams. And we have our Washington quarter, 1932. Well, that is very cool. We learned some history, we relearned some history, and I'm really enjoyed opening these cards. I will open a second box later, and hopefully I'll be able to let you guys know what I got that was cool out of that box as well. And thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.